All right, guys, this is Mr. Narimatsu, and we're talking a little bit about the Cold War, which begins theoretically even before World War II even ends, excuse me. We know that World War II ends in 1945, approximately, but actually the beginnings of the Cold War probably started with the Russian Revolution and the fact that the United States and Britain and France kind of got involved in the Civil War, supporting the whites, the monarchists, and the other groups against the Reds, which is the Bolsheviks and the communism. So hopefully we've spoken to you guys about the idea that during World War II, the reason why France, Great Britain, the United States, and Stalin of Russia basically all work together is because they have a common enemy, which is Hitler. But once again, when the enemy of my enemy is my, if the enemy of my enemy is my friend, well, when the enemy is gone, then we no longer are friends. And that's basically what happens after World War II. Hitler is gone, which is the main threat to Stalin, the main threat to France and Great Britain, the main threat to what we call democracy. And because of that, there's an uneasy forced alliance between the Soviet Union and what we call Western democracies. And you should know that Western democracies are like France, Great Britain, and the United States at this time. So we'll go ahead and go into this PowerPoint. It does a good overview about kind of the foundation and the parts of the war, and we'll walk through this, and hopefully this will help you out for the test that's coming up soon. All right, so the Cold War from 1945 to theoretically 1990. Some historians will say it's 1989 and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But there's kind of some big themes. I mean, it's basically the United States versus the USSR. Now, notice it doesn't say just the Soviet Union. It doesn't say the word Russia anymore. The USSR basically is a United States of different socialist communist states. They're all pretty much located in Eastern Europe at this time. So we're talking about countries like Ukraine, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. And so all of those states, although that they have what we call elections, they're not exactly what we call free elections. Basically, there's only one choice of a candidate, and that candidate is a communist party, and that candidate is being controlled largely by the Soviet Union inside of Russia and Moscow. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. As we go further, I think you'll see that theme keep on happening. It's also the idea of democracy versus communism. You know, democracy is the freedom of elections, but it's also the freedom of your choices. The idea of democracy is to give people more freedom in their choices of how they live their life. It gives free speech. It gives all what we call rights, kind of what we call liberalism. You know, communism, as it has been practiced by Stalin, is basically a totalitarian dictatorship. And everybody sees what Stalin does and some of the kind of the communist leaders or the Soviet leaders after and go, you know, you guys aren't really giving freedom to the people. And it's basically the government controlling almost all parts of society. Religion is going to be outcast because that's communism. That's true of today in China, which is why China and the little country called Tibet has a huge problem, who is a Buddhist monk. There's a guy called the Dalai Lama, and China basically says, we have no religion, because Marx kind of talked about religion being very, very bad and out controls people, and also that causes the difference between the rich and the poor. So, you know, we'll definitely have the fight between democracy and communism. Also, capitalism versus socialism. Should I be able to make choices with my money on what products are made and what businesses should be made? Or should I have a government tell me what I should do? And we know some of the problems when a government tries to control a business. You know, the DMV and the post office may be examples of, you know, maybe not the most efficient and best ways a government can do things. So it's kind of a couple things happening here. So those are the kind of the big themes. I'm sure you're going to see these kind of being played out. So there we go. The United States. You should know that that's the Soviet Union at this time. The Russia has changed its name to communism. And there's a story with Rocky, which kind of talks about the Cold War. I'm not going to go into that because you're not going to have a test question on Rocky. All right. So moving on. Like I said, in 1939, Stalin makes a deal with Hitler, but Hitler breaks this deal and attacks the USSR, which draws Stalin into the fight of World War II. So, you know, I'm kind of going back here and just kind of talking to you guys about the uneasy alliance here. At the end of World War II, and literally World War II is not even done, but we have this guy, if you want to look at the screen. To the left, we have Churchill. In the middle, this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, and also over here is Stalin. So they're meeting here, and they don't even, the war's not even done, but they're pretty sure they're going to beat Hitler. They're going to beat Mussolini, and eventually they're going to beat the Japanese in the Pacific. So they come to a place in Yalta, and they agree in this Yalta conference on a number of points. point number one, we need to create a United Nations. That League of Nations was a good idea, but we didn't have the U.S. involved. Japan got frustrated on its actions. The Soviet Union wasn't part of it, who was obviously a big actor. So we needed the United Nations to kind of control this because, once again, secret treaties, alliances, warfare, militarism, and the lack of diplomacy. I mean, I guess appeasement was some kind of diplomacy, but the lack of diplomacy really forced these countries to think, you know what, we need a United Nations where we can solve these problems, not simply just fight about them and cause another world war or World War III, perhaps. Next, they're very frustrated at Germany. Germany, from 1871 with Bismarck all the way until 1945, has caused major wars inside of Europe. I mean, the unification of Germany really upset the balance of power. So, because Germany has been such a bad actor, accused of it in the Treaty of Versailles with the war guilt clause in World War I, and in World War II, decisively is the one. I mean, Hitler's actions are the direct cause of World War II. So they say, you know what, Germany, we need to control you. And the way that we control you is we're going to divide you up, and England's going to get a section that they're going to control. The US is going to get a section. France is going to section. And also Stalin's going to section. So you can see, again, I know that there's only 3 people up here, but include France in there. So France gets a part, Great Britain gets a part, the United States gets a part, and Stalin gets a part. They also agreed that these places next to the Soviet Union, aka Russia, under domain of Stalin, they make an agreement with Stalin and say, you can't just go in there and force people to tell what type of government they're going to have. This whole totalitarian communism dictatorship thing, we should have free elections in Eastern Europe. And those countries I was naming earlier, they'll be part of the USSR. Stalin agrees to this. But again, every election that he's going to give, it's going to be only one party or one candidate, and that candidate's going to be funded. And really, these aren't really what we call free elections. They are pretty much what we call puppet regimes. In other words, Moscow or Stalin or the Soviet Union is basically telling in these little countries, again, like Poland, Lithuania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, all these countries, they're telling the president what they can and cannot do. So it's definitely a form of control. Also, Russia promises now to join the war against Japan because at this time, Europe is going to be probably Hitler and Mussolini. Mussolini is already dead by this time, but Hitler's definitely going to get defeated. But the Pacific theater is still waging on. Okay. On Poland, there was no agreement. Remember that both Germany and the USSR invaded it and kind of took it over and partitioned it almost again. And there was no agreement reached on that moment. All right. So again, the Cold War characteristics, and this is part of your guys' little timeline activity. It's a political, strategic, and ideological struggle. Obviously, I'd like to add the word military. Military could go under strategic or ideological. But between the U.S. and the USSR, that actually spread throughout the world. And instead of directly attacking the Cold War, we're going to not the Cold War, excuse me. Instead of attacking the USSR, which now because of nuclear weapons could cause some what we call MAD or mutually assured destruction, where 2 nuclear warheads basically go up. One goes to Moscow, one goes to New York or Washington, D.C., and it all blows up. We can't do that. So because of nuclear weapons, what we're going to do is we're going to try to contain communism. We're trying to contain the Soviet Union. Yeah, Soviet Union, maybe you can get this and this, but you're not going to go any further. And it's kind of the idea of what we try to do with Hitler. Again, concerned now about a war, but this time the war is because of technology, nuclear weapons, jets now, aircraft carriers are just making warfare too easy to be catastrophic and kill many people. So we'll talk about that, but just kind of another idea about it. Again, as it says, struggle that contained everything short of a war. The United States and the Soviet Union will never directly, there's a couple times spy planes go down and get shot down, but never is there like Army versus Army, Navy versus Navy. And because the reason is the technology, the warfare between the Soviet Union and the United States, if that would have went down, would have been horrific. It would have been World War III. And some of you guys know that, I guess, Einstein or some famous person said that if World War III happens, then World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And the idea of that is World War III would have been a nuclear holocaust. Basically, probably all the world would have been blown up in a nuclear warfare. At this time, we have thousands upon thousands of nuclear weapons, and so does Russia. So we'll talk about that a little later, how we get rid of those nuclear weapons. The big focus is actually not so much on trying to not trying to attack them militarily, but it's really trying to get other countries to either support democracy or support communism, support freedom or support this kind of government involved and controlling type of a state. So those are the two types of ideologies there. So I'm going to go through this because we don't really care about too much about the United States. I mean, I guess we do because the United States is the big leader of what we call democracy, the big leader of the West, which is the biggest enemy against the Soviet Union and communism. So we'll talk about a couple of things here. Domestic policies, we get this guy McCarthy. Honestly, McCarthy is a senator, and he is rounding up anybody that is considered socialist or communist in this country and basically making them to confess in front of a Senate that they are. And if they are, he starts charging them with treason. This is kind of similar. Some historians would call this a witch hunt. Basically, he's trying to find anybody that's communist during this time. Kind of an interesting note. Helen Keller was a communist at this time, but she had to actually kind of hide her communism. The reason why she had to hide her communist feelings is because she was concerned that if she spoke out, that she might be arrested, might be censored, might be jailed, which is quite interesting. We get the HWAC, which is the House of Un-American Activities Committee. What do you think they're doing? Anybody that's considered socialist, anybody that's communist, anybody saying kind of crazy things that they support the Soviet Union, they're being investigated and at times being arrested. There are loyalty oaths where people come in. There is a blacklist. There's a very famous one called the Hollywood 10. These were 10 directors and actors who said, we support communism. We believe in this idea of socialism. We believe in kind of Soviet Union. And basically, they are fired from Hollywood. They never make a film ever again. So some kind of stuff has happened. Obviously, we have bomb shelters. Why are we having bomb shelters now? At the end of World War II, there were nuclear weapons. So that was a major concern that we could be safe. Foreign policy-wise, we had the Korean War. This is still, actually, we're still at war. We've never signed a peace treaty. So Korea got divided into North Korea and South Korea. North Korea, you guys know, probably is ruled by this guy called Kim Jong-un at this time. It's been a dictatorship based off of communism. They have no access to the internet. They have no TV. Everything's controlled. They worship this guy, the leader, almost like a god. So we have the Korean War, communism in the north and capitalism in the south. And yeah, today at the what we call the 50th parallel, there's a line in where people can actually see the other side. And there's been some interesting moments. We've just had a Department of the Secretary of State go over there, and he was literally like right behind a window, and on the other side of the window was a North Korean soldier taking pictures of him, and that's basically his enemy. I mean, they could have shot our Secretary of State, but obviously North Korea is concerned about shooting somebody in the United States because the United States may retaliate back. Now when we have an arms race, hey, who can make the most weapons to scare the other person so they don't attack each other? So suddenly we create thousands and thousands of nuclear weapons. We don't need that many, but it's just to say, hey, we got so many nuclear weapons, we can basically decimate all of the USSR. And the USSR starts building up its own nuclear weapons. So they go, hey, United States, if you do anything, or any of your friends in Western Europe do anything, we have enough nuclear weapons to blow them up and blow you up as well. The Truman Doctrine was something I just talked about. He came out and he says, you know what? We cannot engage with the USSR, but our job is to contain the USSR. Our job is to contain communism. It is our job to help support democracies that are fighting against communism to contain communism. And you'll see that in a couple examples. Eisenhower Doctrine. Sorry, not going to help you with that one. Got to move on. All right. So what were the six major strategies? They were more brinksmanship, the idea that we're going to do our best to get talk, but if we get to the level, we might be ready to blow each other up. So, and you can see right here how John F. Kennedy in this picture is about ready to blow up what we call a hydrogen bomb, which is even more crazier than the nuclear war bombs, is much more powerful at this time. So the idea that at any time we can start this thing. So don't play with me too much. Don't screw around with me too much. Espionage, a lot of spying. So this is where the CIA is created. Over in Russia, we call it the KGB. Just a heads up, Mr. Putin, who is kind of like a president or leader of Russia for the last 12 years, was a former KGB spy. He was an agent. His job was basically to come over to the United States or use anything for the United States to disrupt us. Foreign aid, again, the United States is going to go ahead and try to help either economically, financially, or even with just food or goods or trading, any way that they can, usually with money, to support democracy. So if you want to be a democracy and you're going to say, I don't like communism, the United States is here to give you a lot of money, a lot of power, and a lot of help. And so you begin to see how we're starting to contain communism. Their alliances are made. This flag right here that just popped up is NATO. It stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This is basically all the Western democracies. So basically from Germany west, this is going to include France. It's going to include Switzerland. It's going to include Italy. It's going to include Spain. It's going to include Portugal. It's going to include Great Britain. And obviously the big power now at this time, because again, we don't really get attacked in World War I or World War II. So the big power at this time is the United States. The United States would say this, and the United States says this. Basically, a NATO, this alliance that we have, when you attack one, it's an attack on all. So if, let's say, the USSR were to attack little Italy, suddenly all of NATO, including the United States, would go up and declare war against the USSR. Again, trying to tell the USSR to stop going, stop moving, trying to contain them. Stalin will create their own, and the USSR will create their own NATO, and it's going to be called the Warsaw Pact. And they're going to say the same thing. Hey, I know Poland's not part of the Soviet Union, but it is part of the USSR. And so all of these countries, yeah, United States, France, Great Britain, if you attack or screw around with these guys, we're going to attack you back together. So they start creating alliances, and hopefully you kind of understood the word spheres of influences. They began creating their spheres of influences. And we'll see this kind of in a map in a second. That'll help you out. And then there's surrogate wars. What do you mean by surrogate wars? Here we have Korea. Here we have Vietnam. Basically, they're going to use other countries to basically either spread communism or contain communism, and that's where the lines are fought. So in this case, again, North Vietnam, going back to Vietnam here, North Vietnam is going to be communist, South Vietnam is going to be capitalist and democracy. We're going to have Russian and Chinese troops in North Vietnam. We're going to have American troops in South Vietnam, and they're going to fight a war. And again, on most of these wars, either nothing has happened or people lose, but there's a lot of bloodshed in between. A lot of historians said that Vietnam is one of our major costly wars, not only in human blood, but also how we felt about the war. So a lot of critics come out, the hippies come out, peace movements come out, and there's some very hard things that happen out of the Vietnam War. So hopefully you understand what they mean by surrogate wars. So the goals of the United States to promote open markets, what we call capitalism, for U.S. goods to prevent other oppression. So they want to be able to go to other countries. This is directly against communism. Communism says, no, there aren't any open markets. We determine the markets. It's a direct attack against capitalism. Promote democracy throughout the world, especially in Asia and Africa. And Asia is going to be a major flashpoint because that's close to the USSR. So that's why you see Vietnam and the Koreas getting involved. Stop the spread of communism, called the domino effect. So over here you have this picture, and the domino effect was like, they said this: hey, if one state falls to communism, it's going to spread communism to the next country, then the next country, and then the entire world is going to have communism. So it's the idea to stop the domino effect. All right. So during this time, now you're going to see what's happening here. So this is called the Iron Curtain over here. These were all countries that basically the USSR came in and gave them free elections, but said, hey, by the way, the only president that you can have is one that's communist and that basically pledges allegiance back to the USSR. All right. So the USSR at this time wants to create greater security. I mean, it's had Germany basically invade them. We've had the United States, France, and Great Britain kind of screw around with them. So they've lost tens of millions of people in World War II. Also, Stalin's horrible purges, where he's getting rid of anybody that's going against what he's saying, was quite bad. And he also feared a strong Germany. He wanted divided. He wanted to have defensible borders. And he would call these actually buffer states. These are places where, in case the West or Germany were to invade over, we'd have a couple of, days, months, hours, whatever it is, basically to get our forces ready to defend ourselves, because just too many people have been dying in Russia. They, again, want these buffer states so that they're friendly, and they're going to make sure they're friendly by basically forcing the elections that they have. They want to spread this idea of communism around the world and get more and more friends as much as possible. I'm going to go back right here. From Stettin to, I'm going to read this because this is from Winston Churchill, and it's a very important, it's called the Iron Curtain speech. It says, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Behind that line lie all the capitals in the ancient states of Central and Eastern Europe. So basically, this is what he called the Iron Curtain. And behind here was all communist regimes. So he basically said, our job is to stop this line from moving even further west. We need to stop it here. And you need him with the United States, Great Britain with the United States, and again, the NATO alliance that they create will effectively stop that from coming over. So the Truman Doctrine is the idea that yes, you should contain it, but actually you should support democracy. So, anyways, I'm going to put it over right here. I'm just going to sum it up right here. The Truman Doctrine was significant because it showed that America, the most powerful democratic country, was prepared to resist the spread of communism throughout the world. So he makes a promise again right here, and you kind of heard this a couple times, but America, oops, sorry, let me go back. America promised it would support free countries to help fight communism. So, hey, you want to be free? We'll give you money. We'll give you troops. We'll do our best to help you out to stop communism. Okay. The Marshall Plan. He is the Secretary of State. He is basically in charge of, I don't know, talking to other countries around the world. That's what a Secretary of State does in the United States. And what he creates is something called the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was all of this money to help Europe recover. There was a little kind of attachment to this. First of all, he wanted to make sure Europe gets strong so that they can start buying American goods and trade begins creating. Also, he believes this: if Europe is stronger, it can stop communism. This communism is basically appealing to the poor, but if the poor are feeling okay, if they're feeling supported by democracies and capitalism, then there's no need for them to draw into communism. So the idea was to make them economically strong. And we can see this true today. We have known many times in history that when people have a hard time, when the economy is down, they start getting desperate for some crazy things, and that's what we can see here. Just to go back, the Marshall Plan can be seen in what we call the Berlin Airlift. It might come to this later, but the Berlin Airlift, what we do is Berlin is, if you want to look down here in the corner right now, Berlin is in the middle of East Germany, so it's basically surrounded by communists. And inside there, they say, we want to be free, and which is the capital city. And so they divide Berlin between East Berlin and West Berlin. Obviously, East is communism, West is capitalism. And we start dropping money and food and all types of clothes and anything that the people need in West Berlin, and we drop it by air. The reason why we have to drop by air is because, again, Berlin is in the middle of East Germany. So if we were to go in there by truck or by tank, we would have fought some Soviets, and we did not want that happening. So we just dropped it by air to hopefully help Berlin become a little bit more free. All right. The Eisenhower Doctrine, which I have completely blanked about and I kind of skipped earlier, so we'll go on and look at this, was announced on Congress on January 5th, 1957. So it required Congress to yield its war-making power to the president. So the president could immediately basically attack communism if they saw it. All right. This is going to be used in North Korea and also the Vietnam. Basically, both presidents during that time are going to go ahead and start a war without the approval of the Congress, which is kind of against our Constitution. The Constitution says that. Its Constitution says that the war needs to be approved by Congress. So after all of that happens, sorry, let me get back to this. Sorry, lost it. Gonna move on. My apologies. But anyways, the doctrine was made in response to the possibility of war threatened as a result of USSR's attempt to use the Suez Canal as a pretext to enter Egypt. So now you can see that they're going to a part of Asia called the Middle East. And so the Middle East is going to start getting involved. So we're seeing all parts of the world starting to decide, is it going to be capitalist and democratic, or are we going to be communist with these kind of what we call puppet regimes? All right. So again, the big idea of the Eisenhower Doctrine is just getting the powers to start war to scare the Soviet Union, which kind of falls under that theme of brinksmanship. So the Berlin Conference kind of talks about it right here, about what happened, or the Berlin crisis, but I think this is kind of a better picture of what's happening here, and I kind of talked about that earlier with the Berlin Airlift. So this is Germany. Here's the British side. Here's the French side. Here's the American side, and there's the Soviet Union side. And so basically what we do, and then here's Berlin, and inside of Berlin, which is inside the Soviet Union side, it's cut up into 4 equal parts as well. So in both cases, what happens is all of this area becomes West Germany, has democracy, gets United States support, gets Great Britain support, gets French support, and this is East Germany, communist, communist, communist. Notice again that Berlin is stuck in the middle of communism. This is why over here they had to drop in food and money and anything that they needed. They actually dropped it by air to bring in these supplies, and what was called the Berlin Airlift, as you can see here. And what was this? These were United States planes, these were British planes, these were French planes with stuff to help this area stop these areas from becoming communist, and hopefully even stop this area. Okay? Hopefully that helps out. All right, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, we already talked about it. It consisted of all these countries. Oops, too fast, going back. Go back. All right, there you go. So there's all the countries. There you go. You can kind of see, oh, Canada's in there? Yeah, because it's part of Britain. Denmark? Yeah. So these are all considered Western, all right? Holland would be the Netherlands today. We still have NATO today. This kind of is frustrating Putin, who is the Soviet Union. He's like, why do we have a NATO? We're not the USSR anymore. We're called Russia. We're not trying to attack you guys anymore, even though there have been some interesting things that he's done. But just as a heads up, we still have NATO today. So if Russia were to attack any one of these people, they would get support. We've actually included more people like Poland, Lithuania, and this is what's kind of frustrating Putin is like some of his friends are now becoming his enemies, and so that's getting a little more aggressive to the United States over the last about 5-6 years. All right, so there you go. There's communism. There it is. There's North Korea. It's going to become communist, but there you go. You can see what we call the this little buffer state. This is what's called the USSR. The reason it's called USSR, not just Russia or the Soviet Union, is because it includes these states. We're kind of making like the United States of communism. Hopefully that makes sense. So Warsaw Pact, same thing. It's in Poland. These are the members, and all of these members basically say this: if the United States are to attack us, we're going to all attack them. So again, it's getting close to brinksmanship again, getting ready to warfare. Here's McCarthy, Republican, and he's whipped up some anti-communism. I kind of talked to you guys about this. He said that we have these secret names. We have these list of names of all of these people who are communists, but then he never gave it to the press or gave it to the public. He just said, you better trust me. I know what I'm talking about. Again, here you can see how Robin Hood, a group of anti-communists, because it's about the poor, and Robin Hood basically attacking the rich to give the poor, which is kind of seen as socialist. So it begins to get banned. Definitely the Communist Manifesto would have been banned at this time. So we began actually kind of reducing free speech and kind of attacking communism here in the United States as well. All right. I did not know they went from the Reds to the Red Lakes. That is freaking hilarious because the Reds would have been the Bolsheviks in the Cold War. So kind of an interesting point there. I'm not going to get too much into McCarthy because I don't think you're going to need to know him too much. But just as a heads up, eventually he falls off from his power. But the idea again is that not only outside the world but inside the United States, we are trying to find these communists and basically trying to stop any of their ideas from spreading. Arms race. The United States blew up the first nuclear weapon, and a lot of historians say that the reason why we did that is that we knew we were probably going to have a problem with Stalin and the USSR, and so we wanted to blow up the nuclear weapons not once but twice to show the USSR that we had amazing weapons and not to screw with us. So, there's that. Also, there was a space race. What's interesting is the first satellite to ever be thrown up into space was the USSR, and right after that, Kennedy said this: in less than a decade, we're going to put a man on the moon, and actually, we did do that. So, not only are we taking this fight in the world, we're actually now taking it to space because of our technology. Okay, so again. I'm trying to understand how technology and military during this time really made it difficult for us to attack one or the other. USSR to attack us or United States to attack the USSR. It would cause too much devastation. This is the spy plane that I was talking about earlier that was shot down. It was actually spying on Russia. They shot it down, and the Soviets captured the guy, captured all the military, and was another moment to get close to actually fighting a real war. There'll be multiple times we get close to fighting the war. So if you want to read more and hit pause on this YouTube video, check that out. You can. Again, the Bay of Pigs invasion. We got this guy called Cuba, and we got this area called Cuba. There's a man called Fidel Castro. He believes in communism. He is just taking it out. And this is during Kennedy's time. Kennedy invades the Bay of Pigs. I think they come in at a low tide. So the ships aren't able to go in, and they actually run aground. And the Cubans knew they were coming, and so they surround the Bay of Pigs with a bunch of military, and it is just an absolutely catastrophe for the United States. A lot of people die, and so you begin seeing this kind of fight between. You can see that communism now is getting close to the United States. I mean, there's Florida 90 miles away. So this is another scare that communism is starting to spread. We're not containing it. And here you can see also some military missile sites. We also had what's called the Cuban Missile Crisis later. And this is when a bunch of ships with nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union got really close to about right here. And they were going to go ahead and put these nuclear weapons here. Now, obviously, these nuclear weapons can attack the United States. But we were able to basically find out that they were here, the United States was, and we started talking to the USSR and say, if those go any further, we're going to have some serious problems. And they actually turned the ships around. But the idea that nuclear weapons, they already had ability to send them, and also that they were so close to the United States began to concern the United States even more. All right. So this is, again, the Bay of Pigs invasion. And like it said, it seriously embarrassed the Kennedy administration because it failed. I mean, there was a lot of people that died. And, you know, a lot of people are like, how is the United States, the most awesome army, navy, military, industrial complex, being killed by basically these communist little rebels in Cuba? And it was a huge defeat. And this is going to happen again. We're going to have that same feeling in Vietnam. How can such a strong country and strong military be defeated by a country that, in their opinion, is so weak? And the North Vietnamese use a lot of crazy military techniques to get there. But the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Vietnam War, are these ideas that we have to try to stop communism, and these were actually failures of communism. And we know Cuba remained communist, and we know that Vietnam becomes communist as well. All right. So a big thing is the Berlin Wall. You guys can read a little bit more about that, but I'm just going to talk about it. If you guys go back, if you remember that Berlin was in the middle of that area, so they basically separated East Berlin and West Berlin, and the way they did that is creating some of the Berlin Wall. What was crazy is that any individuals from the communist side that was trying to get to the Western side, where they had democracy and capitalism, were shot on sight. And basically, the United States and West Germany and Britain and France are trying to encourage all of these people in communism to come over here. But as they're coming over, they're actually getting shot. So this Berlin Wall was not built by us. It's actually built by the Soviets to stop people from coming from East Berlin, where there's communism and life was not really going so well, to come to West Berlin, where life was a little bit easier, where they were getting air raids, where they were getting the Berlin airlift, where their economy was working again. All right. Cuban Missile Crisis, kind of talked about that, so I kind of showed it to you guys. I'm going to kind of speed through. There you go. You can hit pause if you want to read a little bit more. Talked about that. Again, it's still too detailed for what we need to know, so you guys can hit pause on that one time. All right. So eventually, relationships get a little bit better. At this time, then China turns into communist, and actually Richard Nixon goes over there and he basically de-thaws or melts the Cold War away. And so he talks to China, and China and the United States, even though the China is communists, actually start trading together. They start talking together. And so we began seeing presidents both on the USSR and both in the US and also communist countries being a little bit more ready to talk to one another and discuss with one another, rather than sending missiles to one country or dropping airplanes with food and supplies to another. We began having what we call diplomacy, talking to one another. Okay, so I can let you guys kind of hit pause and read that. So the SALT Treaty stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. There's SALT 1 and SALT 2. And basically what all these were to do is to limit the number of nuclear weapons. We had thousands. I mean, look at this. There's 2,250 freaking nuclear weapons that we both have. And the idea was to start basically de-arming those and getting rid of those weapons, throwing those away, those nuclear weapons. So that's what we began doing in the SALT Treaty. So this happened in 1972, 79. Notice that we're still talking, even though we're kind of in the middle of the Vietnam War at this time. But as we're talking, we're trying to get rid of our nuclear weapons so that we're not going to blow the whole world up. So you can see these people began talking a little bit more to one another. The Soviets invade Afghanistan. This is kind of crazy. This is really interesting because the leader of the Mujahideen right here, which are called the Freedom Fighters in Farsi in the Afghan language, the leader of that is a guy called Osama bin Laden. So Osama bin Laden, who was fighting against the Soviets, because the Soviets actually invade Afghanistan and try to turn them into communists, and the Afghans are like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? We want to have our own independence. And so the Mujahideen began fighting the Soviets. Well, again, here comes the enemy of my best friend. So during this time, the United States went, whoa, whoa, you guys, the Mujahideen of Afghanistan are fighting the Soviets? Hey, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. So we began giving them money, and we actually helped train and arm the Mujahideen, one of which is Osama bin Laden, who obviously may cause some serious problems later, like September 11th. Anyways, kind of an interesting moment there. Reagan had this thing called Star Wars. It's kind of based on the movie. It was the idea that we would have these satellites that could shoot down nuclear weapons. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time, and we still don't have that technology today. We're still trying to figure it out, and it's really hard. It's like hitting a bullet with a bullet. It's nearly impossible, but we keep on trying to do these things. And the idea of Star Wars was basically to ensure that Russia, if they're to throw nuclear weapons, we could stop them in midair, but it has yet to work. But we spent a lot of money and a lot of time on it. And when we spend a lot of money, we create a lot of jobs. I mean, you're starting to see Keynesian economics as far as the military goes. They hire scientists, they hire engineers, they need all of these raw materials. So they're getting raw materials from miners and from companies that have this. So the government is spending tax money for military things, obviously. And that's kind of advancing our economy. We're starting to get technology like satellites, like lasers, like those things that help us out. Later, we'll get computers, and obviously that will help us out with those things. But like I said right here, it's totally unproven. It costs billions upon billions of dollars. Some people that critique Reagan, perhaps like myself, would say this was a waste of a lot of money and a lot of time. Those billions of dollars shouldn't have probably gone to the military. Maybe it should have gone to help out our country a little bit more. So just a heads up on that one. All right. So the big guy that really actually stops this, and these are kind of two words you guys want to know, is Gorbachev. Gorbachev is the last what we call Soviet leader, and he basically combats with two things. He says glass notes. And the idea of class notes was this, that we should have openness. And the openness was this, we should actually have democracy. He begins to say, you know what, I think we should allow democracy back and let people have their own choices. Then he has perestroika, which is restructuring, and that was actually for economics. He said, you know what, this communism thing isn't working. And just as a heads up, in communism, it didn't work. When the government had control of the people, their businesses, it was horrible. Since people were kind of being paid the same, people wouldn't show up for work. There was a lot of people just showing up absent but still getting paid. They would have quotas like, hey, this is the number of shoes you need to make, or these are the number of cars you need to make, or these are the number of planes you make. And the business owners, because they were so scared about the government perhaps arresting them for not making the quota, they would actually lie. They'd say, yeah, we're supposed to have 1,000 cars, but we have 50. So say we have 1,500 cars. And the economy was just horrible. I went to Hungary this last time, and there was a story just during Thanksgiving break, and there was a story about a guy who had his own restaurant, which was immediately taken over by the government. They didn't serve as good food, and 3 years before communism happened under Gorbachev, he basically kicked the Soviets out, kicked the government out, and took his restaurant back, and I actually ate at that restaurant today, and it was one of the first restaurants ever being owned by an individual person, not being controlled by the government inside of Hungary. So kind of a crazy story that helps you understand that. There's a punk rock guy that's from Hungary as well that actually lived under the Soviet Union, and he talked about how his grandfather had all of this money, but immediately when they got taken over by the communists, all of the money was taken by them, and he had absolutely nothing, and the money got redistributed equally. So there was no rich, there's no poor, theoretically, everybody was supposed to be the same. Well, you can see how frustrated you would be if your grandfather, who worked so hard and saved all this money, and in basically one day, all of it's taken away from him. So you begin to see some of the problems of what we call with communism, and when the government has total control of not only the society but also the economy. And so Gorbachev kind of looked at this and went, you know what? We need to have a little more democracy. You know what? We need to have a little more capitalism. And kind of like Lenin makes some deals with capitalism, he actually is going to make some major deals. And when Reagan at this time hears this, he says, hey, tear down this wall. And eventually they tear down the wall, which is right here. So here's a tear down the wall. Here are the democracies over here, and here are some of the first soldiers that are there, and the Berlin Wall. This has happened in 1989. A lot of historians will say the fall of the Berlin Wall signals that the USSR was willing to allow capitalism, allow democracy, or allow people to decide what they want. Do they want communism? Do they want a democratic state? Not so much the Soviet Union is going to force this on them. And so this is kind of seen as a symbolic end of the Cold War, but not necessarily the official end. So that's what happens during this time. I've talked to some Germans about this, and when you go to Germany today, East Berlin looks horrible. It looks like a third world country, and West Berlin looks beautiful and amazing. And that still kind of happens today. So it again kind of shows you that communism was not working really, really, really well. There's a lot of poverty, a lot of famine. We're developing computers, and they don't even have one. I know they put up the first satellite, but we put a person on the moon. We have multiple satellites at this time. We're inventing cell phone technology. So you begin to see that there are some major issues with the idea of communism as it's been played out according to the USSR and the Soviet Union, and especially during the Cold War. All right, here, kind of moment. It's reunited in 1990. So East and West Germany are reunited in 1990, and now they're a major country. I mean, they're very much the leader of NATO and also the EU today. The Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, is very, very strong. And I think this is kind of an interesting moment about Germany. Germany is a very strong country. It was divided. It came together under Bismarck. It got divided and got treated like crap during the Treaty of Versailles. It got back underneath Hitler. It got divided, and in the 1990s, it comes back together. So again, I hope you understand and appreciate, since the Holy Roman Empire to Prussia to Germany, how, I don't know, industrious and focused and the Germans were about creating a very strong country and strong government. Super nationalistic, I would agree. So here's this issue with Ukraine. Ukraine basically gets rid of the USSR and becomes friends with the United States, and this has been an issue with Putin today. So, but basically, that's kind of the end, guys. So hopefully you understand the idea about the Cold War. I wanted to give you guys just 35, 40-minute type of little lecture that hopefully you can listen at home before the test, and hopefully helps you understand the Cold War. All right, kids, go do something great. Be awesome.